Okay, cool. So I am the first item. So yeah, so I wanted to talk about something we brought up in previous environments meetings. It's the idea that the default revision should be able to win leader elections basically every time. And if you make a revision, the default revision, it should become the leader. So as some background, basically we have a bunch of controllers that only one Istio-D revision, or actually not even revision, only one Istio-D replica should run. For example, like when we patch webhooks, updating ingress status and other stuff, we actually only want one instance to be doing those things. So the idea is we just added this idea of the default revision, which is like the user designating a revision as kind of the primary revision in use. So it would make sense that that revision should be the one responsible for running all of these singleton controllers, the singleton logic. So that's kind of the background. The design. So John has actually added, I think, in anticipation of needing something like this, some work into Kubernetes so right now in Kubernetes, the leader election is kind of, it wouldn't let us do this prioritized. It wouldn't let us do this thing where we need to kick out an old leader and, usurp them based on our priority. So there's some changes that John has open into Kubernetes that make it so that you can have different leader election clients have a different priority so they can boot out existing leaders. It's looking unlikely that logic will get merged soon. I don't necessarily know when that would make it in, but the idea here is that we could just fork the altered leader election library into Istio temporarily. Yeah, so go ahead.
Sorry, why do we need this complicated change? I mean, we seem to have a much simpler solution to just, we watch the mutating webhook anyways, and we know when we are default, and when we are default, we relinquish master, no? Voluntarily.
So that's the problem. Is we rely on the Kubernetes leader election logic, and the Kubernetes leader election logic, the logic we need to change is actually like lock acquisition, and that doesn't exist in our code. That exists in library code. There's like no way for us to. Yeah. Sorry.
John?
Go ahead.
Yeah, what Sam said, and also we don't want the logic to be as simple as if I'm not the default one, don't take the leader election lock. Because if you end up with no default or all the default pods are down, then you may have an outage, right? I think we want the default to be priority, but not only, if that makes sense.
Well, if default is down, you have an outage anyway because, well, that's what's sort of supposed to sort of almost a workload. So I don't think.
Yeah, that's fair, probably. Yeah.
And again, knowing if you are default or not is important for other reasons. I mean, having the functionality to know you are default or not, that's useful in general. And once you know, you just relinquish and we have. I think there is an API to stop being the master. I mean, to drop the mastership.
From looking at it, you can cancel the context once the leader election is running. That's possible.
Then stop doing whatever we are doing I mean, that's super clean and it consistent with what behavior we want to have. I mean, it's not. But anyway, yeah, if they change it, wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know. Going back to what John said about, we don't want the default revision to exclusively be the one that can handle these things. I do think we would like other revisions to be able to come in and take these.
I highly
like, for example. I mean, we do have some users who have multiple revisions, right? Not for upgrade purposes, but for difference of configuration, right? So in those cases, you might want just some revision handling these things. It's not like a total, if the default revision is down, we want to stop operation, or we don't care because operation is down anyway type deal.
Why complicate things when we can say just you always have a default revision that is responsible for patching webhooks and doing status and all the other stuff? Because otherwise it's again very complicated to know which one is. I mean, by the one who owns who wins the mastership election is becoming the default. So because it's the one updating status and configs and other stuff. So what's the benefit of
Right.
making things more complicated than just saying that there is always one default that is responsible for the controllers and its master, and that's it. I mean, no more hard to debug, figure out which one is now the master, revision 1, revision 2, revision 3, because then you have priorities. You have a very complicated system in place when you already have default, which solves this problem.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Okay. So I made a comment, and I'll rework and look back into that and how that would look implemented over the current leader election stuff. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think that's basically everything. There's a bunch of stuff that's kind of in flight because, obviously the prioritized stuff isn't in yet, and yeah. Okay.
So to be clear, I mean, my concern is, primary concern is that the intent for default is to have, almost all production workloads to use default, because that's really what production is using, and for the other revisions to be used for upgrade or for, experiments or whatever else. But we want users to have a deterministic behavior. I mean, to know always that the stable versions, the default one is used consistently, know what to debug. If there is a problem, they know where to look. So that's why I prefer the solution where default is made default.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'll also look in, so to make sure that what we're even describing now, with only having the default able to claim it, I think that's possible with the current implementation, but it might be cleaner. It would pretty much definitely be cleaner still in terms of like how it's implemented to fork that code over, but that obviously has a pretty tremendous cost. So yeah, okay, I'll look back into that. Yeah, that's everything for that proposal, I think. Does anybody have any other comments on it?
So Sam, based on that, should we wait for you to come back, or should we look at this still, this document that you have? Do you want to come back to us,
yeah, I'll
yeah.
come. Yeah, I'll come back to you all next week once because I just need to look into the implementation details to make sure this is viable without forking.
Or we can separate the feature definition and then the requirements, which are, you need to have, prioritized leader election, from the actual implementation, which may change. It's not necessarily that we have both all the implementation details in the same document. I mean,
okay,
we can approve the feature, which is leader election to be done by default, but.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The high level idea is something that we have to do. I'm fine with either implementation as long as we can convince ourselves that we'll always have a default revision and we won't somehow end up with no leader or something. That would not be good. But if we can do that, then we should be fine.
It's safer to have no leaders than to have two leaders. So like we have today.
Today we don't have two leaders. We'll just have a random one be a leader, right?
No, for the Kubernetes Gateway, you had some period where they were fighting with each other because you're doing different leader election.
I think it's the opposite issue actually. Is that you have one version is controlling the alpha 1, one version is controlling alpha 2. So whichever one gets picked, the other one will be broken.
Yeah. Oh, now, yes.
Yeah.
The new problem. Anyway, I think we're in agreement. I mean, we want to fix it, and both any solution is fine. I mean, if you fork it and maintain it, that's some cost. If we, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think one risk that maybe I haven't discussed is this is pretty core logic, so it's really important that we have some revision doing it, and it requires us to have a really good way of knowing which revision is the default revision. Right now, that's the webhook. And John brought this up as a comment in the doc. I do wonder if this makes it so that we need a better way, like a better way to canonicalize, like.
Oh, yes.
what's-
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I have this problem myself in some other project. So relying on webhooks, it's a very messy business because you may have clusters where you don't even have permissions to create webhook and you use, manual injection or other mechanism. So I would really like to have a config map that, when we write the config map for tags, we can write a config map in Istio systems that can have the default and the current status. So you can, kind of use tools and other things to automatically do all this stuff
So,
without parsing
yeah,
webhooks.
is the idea with, if we had a config map that held the mappings, and I'm a fan of that idea, is the idea then that we'd have a controller that generates all of the webhooks from that config map, or
Yeah, the default, I
Um,
mean, your logics that you are doing today, I mean, or Istio cattle tag default will update the config map to set the default. And it will manipulate the config map as ever. I mean, either Istio cattle set default or the whatever other tools that may want to do the equivalent role.
yeah, okay. Then there are some other questions with Helm and Istio control playing nicely with each other on overriding or adding to that config map, but that's again
That's not Helm. I
details.
mean, Helm will not be involved in this.
Well, we did it. I thought we made it so that well, it hasn't been done, but we agreed that we need to be able to specify revision tags through the base chart. If you
Oh, yes,
don't,
yes.
and if you do that, then you should probably generate the config map alongside with those tags. Probably.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem. I mean, if Helm, if base is owning these config maps, and then every time you modify base, it will override, and then Istio cattle will fight with Helm base.
Yeah. That's the problem I was thinking of.
Let's think how we can solve the problem. I mean, we can have multiple config maps with a label or a naming pattern, but we clearly need something cleaner than parsing webhooks and to discover stuff.
That's a good point that we could maybe merge two different config maps. It's complicated, but yeah, that could work. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, actually, another thing I wanted to bring up. Well, actually, I can bring that up later because there are other items on the agenda, and I don't want to go too far off topic. So.
One more thought on this config map subject. Since this is an internal config map, we don't need to have a wonderful API for it, but we should, learn what we what they did wrong with the old config maps and start it flat, basically, because patching config maps is difficult if it's not flat.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So basically something that is, key value pair that can be used as environment variables loaded, and so very easy to parse, very easy to patch, and intended for tools basically that integrate with Istio to, if someone writes a UI to select I want to deploy this Istio with this version or whatever. You get what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. John, would you like to share the doc, or are you all right if I just share it?
I think you can just share it. That's fine.
Okay. Cool.
It's not very long. Yeah, so every week I'm going to come back with a new proposal on how to install gateways. So this is the deployment of the week. Just kidding, hopefully. So we've been talking a bit in the past about automatically deploying gateways based on gateway resources. But we never really had a doc to discuss this, so I kind of drafted something up real quick on what I think that would look like, and I wanted to get some early kind of feedback and opinions on what people think of this. Yeah, Costin's got next week's idea, or this week. So basically, the high-level idea is that a user would create a gateway, like on the left, and this is a Kubernetes gateway resource. It's just a standard one. In this case, they're exposing port 1234 and port 80. And today they would then need to go create a deployment and service for the gateway, make sure that the service has those same ports exposed. And if they ever try and add a port, they have to make sure it's kept in sync, etc. This is a bit of a pain. We've done a lot to simplify this and had some success. Some people still find it kind of tedious to manage the gateway. So the idea is we do it for them and we just create the gateway and the service. That's pretty much the high level. I think it's pretty simple. Any questions so far? Okay. So I think the
Default will-
biggest. Sorry, go ahead.
Default, who will create this? I mean, the default or the ones that won the election from Sam's proposal?
Where this thing that creates gateways is deployed is kind of an open question, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. It may be an Istio D, in which case it would be the default.
Oh,
but
is
we
there
could
an
run it
option?
somewhere else.
Oh, is there an option to use it separately? That would be awesome.
I think that's one option. Yeah, I mean, we could bundle it in Istio D, or we could make a separate thing. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of customization, I think that's usually where operators are. I mean, I usually hate operators, so for me to propose an operator, it feels odd to me. But usually the reason I don't like it is because when you have an operator, like you need to customize a ton of stuff just to get a pod in your cluster. Like people have requirements for security context, pull secrets, setting requests, affinity, blah, blah, blah. Like there's hundreds of fields. And that means that then they have to go create an API that's kind of doing a poor copy of deployment. We've all heard me rant about this before, probably. The reason why it doesn't suck for us, I think, is because we already have a mechanism to configure arbitrary pod things, which is the injection. And so in the above example, I showed just like the bare bones deployment, which is like the minimum we need. If a user wants to customize that, that's fine. They can just create a gateway template or a custom injection template with whatever fields they want. And then, we're injecting the gateway, so they get any customization they want. And we don't have to like create a separate API that has all these different fields. The one thing that's left then is the service. So about half the service is the ports, which we're managing for them. That's kind of one of the benefits. There's a few other customizations that people want in service. One is the type. And then there's like the load balancer IP. So load balancer IP is already a field in gateway, so we can keep that. And then the other thing is a bunch of annotations, like because different implementations have different things. Like this is not the full GK one because it's long, but there's like an annotation to make an internal load balancer. There's like 30 AWS annotations. So a lot of times services are customized through that. I was thinking that we can just copy the metadata over from the gateway onto all the objects we create. That's common in like Knative does the same thing. So it kind of allows you to inject any annotations.
Which gateway?
The gateway on the left, the input. So
No, but you can have multiple gateways are merged. So I can have gateway 1 that is opening port 80, gateway 2 that is opening port 1, 2, 3, 4. And we kind of merge them in a single service because we want to use the same IP.
Yes. So right now, the current design doesn't allow merging. No merging allowed. We could allow merging, and we'd have some sort of way to like declare one like the parent and the other ones like the merges. I don't know. I don't know what we call it. I just in the initial. I don't have it in this doc, but I have thought about it a bit. Yeah.
So the gateway doesn't have host name basically. So because the use case would be you have 5 host names. It's a common use case. You have example.com, full example.com, booking for the example.com. You create a gateway for each gateway delegate to a different namespace, and it's a separate resource. But they are all port 80. They, you don't want.
Well, you can still do that. It's just in one gateway resource instead of 5. Like listeners is a list, right? So you can just have a big list.
Oh, but host name is not, I think.
No, host name is part of the listeners list. So.
Oh, you have multiple listeners on both.
Yeah. So the only reason why you would want to split the gateway object, I believe, is like if you want to share the same IP and everything, is really just if management is easier. Like if you have a gigantic gateway with like 4,000 domains or something, it may be kind of a pain to manage in one object.
Also,
But it shouldn't be required for small users at all, even if they want to.
no, but the delegation and all that permission stuff where okay, I'll take a look.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
fine.
the gateways are always in the same namespace anyway, so permission shouldn't be really an issue either.
Okay.
I don't know. Can you scroll back down? I forget what else was on here. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think I mentioned everything. Oh, the other thing would be like pod disruption budget and HPA. We could add like an API on top and automatically create those configured by like annotations or something, but we could also just have the user create those if they want. Like the naming of the deployment is deterministic based on the gateway, so they can always create those and attach them after the fact, and it would kind of compose well. The other two things are just upgrades. We kind of already have an established upgrade pattern of you restart the pod in place. We could make the controller smarter and do more advanced upgrades and safer upgrades. That's probably outside the MVP though, but we could explore that in the future. And kind of going back to what Costin said in terms of where we put this, it's not like this would not be that hard to implement, but it does have like very high RBAC privileges, creating services and deployments in any namespace. So we could consider making it a separate controller and or in Istio, perhaps both options. I don't know. Either one is technically possible. We could explore which one is preferable to users, or like if we want this to be an Istio ecosystem project versus first class for long term or short term or anything like that. So that's pretty much it. Because right now this is more RFC than thorough design doc. I just want to get people's thoughts on this.
Yeah, you know my thoughts on this idea. I'm 100% for it. On using a separate controller, I can see a lot of benefits because Istio is becoming very complicated, and having smaller repositories that are focused on what task can be deployed independently and also eventually linked into Istio, that will give us a bit more velocity and avoid polluting Istio with stuff that may or may not work. So we can get feedback, and so yeah, it's not breaking Istio into microservices because the code will still be imported in master. So Istio master may still link the code and have an option to run it, but you can have the microservice running independently as well. So.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't have a whole lot of background with the service APIs. So would this idea basically replaces having to do like creating a gateway manually that gets injected?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
so like normally you deploy Envoy and then you configure it with the gateway resource. Now you just create a gateway resource and it both deploys Envoy and configures it in one gesture.
Okay, that makes sense.
So you'll never
So
have to configure ingress gateways again. So there is no more, such users will never have to deploy an Istio ingress gateway or use a Helm template or anything like that.
Yeah, my vision for how the user experience for install would be is you actually just do like Helm install Istio, and then that's it. You never have to do anything else. I mean, you install the CRDs too, but then you can just create gateways like you normally would. Like if you're using a cloud ingress or a gateway provider, it's kind of the same thing. Like for like GKE, I just create an ingress and it goes provision some cloud load balancer for me. I never have to do any deployment steps beforehand. So this would be the same, except for it's running inside your cluster.
And the nice thing is that Istio, when Istio is upgraded, it can, check, hey, my version is 1.10.5 and the deployment for gateway is a previous version and start restarting it basically. So when you upgrade Istio, it can take care of making sure the gateways are up the same version.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I should mention is that if we have not multi-primary, the opposite one, where there's a shared control plane with a config cluster, like we'll have to figure out, the gateway will live in one place, but the actual deployments may live in mini clusters. So we'll have to figure that out as well.
Yes, absolutely. And also we have the option in this case to have user designate where they want to keep the gateways, because gateways, you may have workloads in workload cluster where you run all kind of unprivileged stuff, but you may want to consolidate all the gateways in a super secure cluster where you have secrets, certificates, and other things, so we don't have the secrets leaking basically. And that's an important use case for security conscious users basically.
I have another question. Like, so if the gateway gets updated, does it automatically update the other portions, or does it only do on the initial creation?
No, it should update it. So if you added a new port, say 443, then it would go update the service. And likewise, if you delete the gateway, like it should tear everything down. So it should have kind of like a full operator / controller.
Let's call it controller. And since it's part of Istio or separate controller, it's not necessarily operators that install stuff.
Is the idea that the controller would generate the service and deployment from the existing gateway chart?
Maybe. I don't think so, actually. So like we have both. Like I think we could do the minimal deployment as in the example, literally. I don't know. I mean, we can make it generate whatever we want. That's kind of.
John, not the current chart. I mean, the clean chart, yes, but the current chart doesn't make sense because that's Helm specific with 100 values.yaml and other stuff. I mean,
yeah, like this is kind of an alternative to using Helm. Like we want to expose a values.yaml for the gateway. If they want to modify the CPU, then they would modify the injection template. And one thing I forgot to mention is that modifying the global injection template may not be feasible or desired if you have like a namespace level gateway. So I was thinking we could introduce like a per pod kind of inline template. So if you wanted to modify the CPU on the gateway resource that's on like the left-hand side, you just add an annotation that's like Istio / inline template, and then CPU resources equals 1 CPU or something.
CPU is not a good example because you already have an annotation for CPU. And if you are saying that you copy the annotations from gateway to service and deployments, then CPU will end up in the right place.
Okay, then I don't know, priority class field or something obscure.
Yeah.
I guess if someone manually updated the service now, would it get rejected? Like, would the operator override any changes, or will those changes stay?
I would generally say yes, but we need to be a bit careful because I did do like a proof of concept of this, and I was making sure that the service was exactly as we specified, but then there was some other controller that was always adding its own annotations to the service. And so it was like in a loop, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to be smart enough that it reconciles the changes we care about. Like if they remove port 80, then like we should add it back because that's what the expectation is, but also not conflict with other controllers. How exactly that will work, I think we'd probably have to look at what other things are doing. It should be something that's generally, like this is not the first thing that's creating services and deployments. So there's probably a lot of prior art on what the best practices are there.
Knative.
Yeah,
Knative
exactly.
is doing it. Have a long practice of doing this. John, one comment I have is about this whole injection and injection template. It's probably a segue to what I want to discuss next week about the injection less. But if you have this controller and this controller can read config maps and everything else, there is no need to actually create the pod, have the pod call a webhook patches the pod and creates the pod really. You can just have this controller read the injection map, read the pod specification it's intended to apply, and just patch it directly without going through 3 other round trips to back and forth, and just create the pod as it should be injected. I mean, with the same things that the 3 round trips would do.
Yeah, you could do that.
And that's basically what I'm trying to get is that if you have a controller or some startup code that is aware of Istio and injection template and config maps and everything else, you can bypass injection. You don't have to have injection enabled in the cluster.
Yeah, it does. It changes how upgrades work, maybe in a good way. Because if we do that, then it means that the gateway controller is in complete control of the upgrade, because they, like, the pods will not upgrade until it decides that it's going to kind of rerun the injection template and set the image to whatever the active one is. If we do it the way it's proposed here, then it's actually the injection template, which is largely driven by the control plane admin, like the Istio admin, that does it. Like a restart of a pod, they get the new image, right? Both have pros and
Sure.
cons, I think. I'm not sure that one's inherently better than the other one, but it is it's a bigger change than just saying that we're avoiding a round trip to the webhook, I think.
I agree with you. It's basically saying that the gateway controller that is creating pods is responsible for the pods and all the life cycle of the pod. So if it takes that the template has changed, it will reapply the template and redeploy the pods in a controlled manner. If it detects that that tag changed, it will redeploy them again, and it can do smart things. It's not like a rolling restart. I mean, it's a bit more smarter.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And you don't want people to do the rolling row upgrades for the deployment manually. I mean, come on, you have a controller.
Oh, I can't make things too easy. It's Istio, right?
Yeah, in particular, if we go with the advanced solution where you actually deploy the gateways in a separate cluster in the first place, because again, you want to keep certificates separate and separation of whatever, then you cannot even do rolling upgrades because you not have permissions in that cluster or to manage infrastructure. So 1.12.
I mean, we could definitely at least push something into the ecosystem by 1.12. I mean, I have a simple proof of concept of this, so the code is not the hard part. The remaining 80% is the hard part.
So let's push it to Istio ecosystem so we can start testing it, and presumably it works even with current Istio 1.10 or 11. No.
Right now, it's only reading the gateway API resources. In theory, there's no reason it couldn't use the Istio gateway ones, other than I like the gateway API ones more.
No. That's fine. I'm absolutely not touching Istio. No. I'm saying that if in Istio 1.10 someone deploys a gateway.
Yeah, I mean, it will either work with 1.10 or 1.12 because we changed the API version. It's all. But it could, yeah, it works with the older Istios for sure.
Okay, let's do it with master. That's fine. I mean, with the new, I think we can kill the old API as soon as possible because.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's still ecosystem, and we should think about if we want to also. Nah, let's not think about it. Just the new API, new gateway.
Any opinions from anyone else? Mitch, Jacob, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking over this. I need to take a closer look, but no, the gateway APIs are where we need to be headed. So I mean, this looks like this would be simpler for people, and also like an incentive for people to actually start adopting them. I think we need to start trying to push that so that we can start trying to remove other things in this, or at least figure out a migration path or whatever. But no, I mean, At a cursory, it looks fine. It looks actually like a good proposal.
Yeah, I'd say it looks obvious. It's great.
Yeah, the one thing from the user experience point of view that I think we would want to look into. So I would imagine, like, who is our target audience for this? And is that every single user of the new Gateway API? I'm thinking most likely no. It will probably be an option that you can make it managed, or you can manage it yourself. So then who is our audience for using this automated thing? Seems like it should be probably the hopefully large percentage of not super bespoke custom users. And then how big is that group, right? If that's 80, 90% of users, then that's awesome. And I think this makes a lot of sense. If only 5% of users think this is useful, then it's probably not really worth it, right? So I don't know how to answer that question right now, but it would be something that would be interesting to find.
So, John, I don't necessarily agree with this statement. I think this should be the default. This should be what we recommend people. And if they want to do something different, they can do it by themselves. I mean, it's too difficult to support Helm chart, Istio cattle install, and 20 other ways for the current gateway. I mean, if they want to have pains, they can continue using the Istio APIs and not use Kubernetes Gateway. But if they use a new Kubernetes Gateway, they should have just one way where they don't have to manually manage deployments.
All right, I'm a bit confused because I thought when I talked with you about this the other day, I suggested that we don't make the simplified Helm chart and we just do this instead. And you said that this won't be useful for everyone and we need the Helm chart too for all the power users.
Well, John, I'm
so
not always. I can change my mind from time to time, and I'm
okay. That's
usually
what I'm
wrong.
sure. Like, did I misunderstand, or did you change your mind, or
both? I thought about our discussion, and I said, "You're very convinced." No, the simplified gateway was intended. I think it's for the current gateway and for current users that use Istio APIs, and it's a better experience than what we have. What I'm saying here is that for the new Kubernetes API, we should not repeat the mistake of having two Helm charts and Istio cattle and who else, but use only this new model. That doesn't mean we should not have the simplified gateway for the existing users, for the existing Istio gateway. It's a bit more refined than
yeah, it'll be tricky if this is the only option.
only supported option. Only supported option, I mean.
Well, yeah, it could be. But what we'll have to think about is migration. Like, we want to make the movement to the Gateway API as frictionless as possible. And that means that we either need to support existing deployments so that they can just change the API and not the deployment, or it would need to like take over an existing Helm or Istio Cuddle controlled deployment. Right, because we can't tell people in order to adopt a new API, you have to go create a new service and get a new IP. That's probably not going to be something that's, we won't get as much adoption.
We'll probably need to take over the whole service. But for new users, we can tell them to, well, first of all, not create them in Istio system in the first place. I hope you are not, I mean.
Oh, come on. You got Istio ingress namespace there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think every example is now not using Istio system. So
no, but you cannot migrate the IP address from Istio system to Istio ingress. That's a problem. So
right.
If you migrate, you need to keep it in Istio system. So we don't have the problem of migration if we put it in Istio system because it cannot be migrated as far as I know. Well, it can, but it's complicated.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds like we have a lot of things to figure out here, but seems something that we should do. So.
Yeah, and as far as the MVP is concerned, though, I don't think you have to worry about migration. I think we should try and understand how people, like how we wish to do migration, but I don't think that needs to be done as part of the MVP. I think this is more just like pushing new greenfield, and like, large customers that are doing crazy things with Ingress, we'll be able to hopefully solicit more, but at least for like new onboarding users of Istio, which there always are. Like this is something we should kind of strongly be pushing them kind of towards. But yeah, let's just give some consideration at least to migration. But I don't think it has to be implemented, at least not anytime soon.
Okay, I mean, I already have some code I hacked together, so I can easily get that up in Istio ecosystem for now, and then we can refine it. The hard part will certainly be the productionization. Creating a service and deployments, not so hard. But
What
doing
is the
it
process?
right, no
What is the
outage,
process
etc.
those days to get stuff into Istio ecosystem? You just push it there.
I think you just ask Lynn to create a repo, and then she can make whoever owners, and then it's pretty much the same as your own
Thanks.
repo.
I have one.
Or I mean, I could even just start my own repo now, and then we can transfer it later if we wanted.
One thing to kind of caveat to watch out for, I've seen in other, like in the operator project where we were modifying gateway services, server-side patch has some odd behaviors on the service. And in the past, we've seen cases where that effectively meant that changing anything about in this case, it'd be the gateway object or the operator object with regard to the gateway, resulted in the gateway IP address being recalculated if it was not explicitly requested, which does cause problems for load balancers and the like. So just something to keep an eye out for as you go through this.
Yeah, that's a good point. That would be catastrophic here. I mean, unlike the operator, our one goal is to create the ingress service. So if we do that wrong, then that'll be good. So hopefully we can avoid that.
Awesome. Does anyone have any other topics they'd like to go over before we cut it? Okay, cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sam.